to help people find affordable places to live. We're joined by Andrew Teacher, an independent property consultant. Good morning, Andrew.
Morning.
So what is the prospect for London's housing market? Buy-to-let investors have dodged the threat of long-term rent-controlled tenancies, and there's no mansion tax.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we've done pretty well out of it from a political point of view where it comes to housing. I mean, both parties, I think, were equally useless on coming up with anything that was going to help supply. And that's the crucial thing, because I think all of those policies you mentioned there are tinkering around the edges when it comes to the actual problem. And yes, of course, there are people that face rising rents, but the answer there, of course, isn't to go and take us back to the 1970s and start capping everyone's rent rises. The answer is to get building, and that's one of the things that the coalition, in its defence, did do quite well during its tenure. It made a very big play to encourage building for rent, so that's getting American-style corporate renting built, and that's, to be honest, the only way you're going to do that on any kind of volume level.
What do you mean by that, corporate-style American renting?
So basically what I mean by that is so at the minute, our renting is a big deal. London is probably the one area in the country where renting privately is genuinely the fastest growing type of housing.
But that's because people can't afford the housing.
Well, not necessarily. No, this is one of the things. And so let me take a bit of a punt at the BBC here, if I may. And I am a former journalist,
you may.
so give me 10 seconds at least.
Security.
But the problem is that people, unless you're building housing for social housing, unless you're building housing for low-income families, or you're building luxury housing, people don't want to know. And the thing is not everyone rents privately because they can't afford to buy. Not everybody rents privately because they haven't got money. Some people just quite like the hassle-free lifestyle of not having to shell out for a boiler when it goes. Some people like the fact that they can.
Yes, they do. But can I just interrupt, just very briefly, Andrew, just to say that I would suggest that the vast majority of those would say that they pay far too high a rent, though, for those places that they're in.
Oh, yeah, and that's true, and there is a problem when it comes to value. But here's a question then from me. What if you could pay that same amount of rent and what you got was something that was better value? And this is one of the things.
I think people would agree with, people wouldn't mind about that.
So that's the thing. And think of it, things like iPhones, so, smartphones rather. So smartphones now cost hundreds of pounds, but people don't bat an eyelid about paying hundreds of pounds for what's essentially a mini computer. And the reason for that is because it isn't just a mobile phone, it is a mini computer, so it's that sense of value. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that in America, housing is provided broadly by big companies, so that's a single landlord, a single entity will own hundreds and thousands, or often hundreds of thousands, of apartments for rent. It's called the multi-family sector, and that basically provides housing for rent, but also with lots of other services often thrown in. So, for example, you might be able just to pay one fee and get your electricity, your cable TV, your Wi-Fi, or whatever it is bundled into. You've got one clear figure that comes out of your bank account each month, and you know what's happening, you know what's going on, and that's provided as a service. But these companies, as well as providing this stuff, are building it, and that's the crucial difference with buy-to-let, is that buy-to-let, it basically eats up housing that's built for sale. So there's no difference in it. And
so how do you do that, though, Andrew? How do you actually make that suddenly happen?
Well, it's starting to happen across London. The way you make it happen is by encouraging these investors to come in and go, actually, yeah, rather than build shopping centres, we'll build homes for rent. And the way that that's starting to happen is companies are buying up land and they're developing clusters of housing. So there typically will be, blocks, towers, because they need that density. They need to have 100 or so flats on one site so they can employ one concierge, they can employ a cleaner, they can employ a handyman. And obviously you need to have a certain number of flats in one site to make that economically viable. But we're already seeing dozens of schemes around town, from Archway, the old Archway Tower, that's being converted by a company called Essential Living. They're turning that old nasty 1960s office block, which has been empty for about 6-7 years, into 120 new apartments. Similarly, there are all kinds of developments going up around the periphery of town that are that sort of thing. So flats for rent that will be owned by a single landlord, and this sense of build to rent, the Mayor of London actually thinks could develop quite a few thousand a year, because he's got a target for it. They've got a 5,000 a year target for homes built for rent. And I think this is one of the very, very, very top priorities for London, and certainly along with expanding Heathrow needs to be one of the top priorities for whoever succeeds Boris Johnson as the next Mayor of London.
Thank you for joining us, Andrew Teacher, there, an independent property consultant talking to BBC London 94.9.
6:15 is the time. It's Louise Pepper with the travel.
Thank you, Penny. Starts with the M25.